We're here today in Paris for our first exhibit of the ISIS Prison Museum. Behind me is a wall that depicts some of the areas that we've photographed and we've captured in 360 virtual tours. It represents several locations in the old city of Mosul. We have towns, for instance, we have villages, and we have other areas that we have captured. In this case, we've captured a home, which is a home that belonged to a very prominent family. The home is called Meydan, and we've actually reconstructed what Meydan, the house, was like before it was taken over by ISIS. So when you actually visit our website, which is IPM or ISIS Prison Museum, you can actually virtually walk through this and see what it's like. We walk in detail to explain exactly how ISIS occupied this location and how ISIS treated the prisoners during the course of their time. We've verified that by doing multiple interviews with survivors that were actually in these prisons. Again, viewing our virtual tours, you can actually listen to these people. You can listen actually where they stood and how they were treated during the time of ISIS. Many of them were treated horrifically with beatings continuously throughout the time they were in the prison. Other locations, perhaps is a church. ISIS took a number of buildings. None of them actually were prisons. In this case, this was a home at Meydan. Another one was a church, a Syriac church that was taken and converted into a prison. And again, we have detailed descriptions of survivors that talk about their time during their capture under ISIS. We also have a very detailed tour of the old city of Mosul. We went back and forensically photographed the entire city, and you can actually walk through every alleyway, every little small area. You can actually go into some of the homes as well, the ones that are not fully destroyed, and visit that and listen to the stories that exist of those different areas during your time visiting this old city of Mosul. Again, this is our first exhibit in Paris at the UNESCO Headquarters. We have many more planned in the future. As I mentioned before, Meydan House that we've actually shot in 360 video and produced a very high definition virtual tour. This is an example of the reconstruction of the actual Meydan House when ISIS was in control. As you can see, we produced these detailed reconstruction with showing ISIS members and exactly what took place during the time of ISIS. Here you see a prisoner that's being brought into an interrogation room. His head is covered. He goes through a series of interrogations and so on. In this particular recreation, we also have the ability to either go forward or back in time. So by using a simple method of clicking on an icon, we can actually now see the time in the current time. And this is what was left of the home after it was bombed by the Allied forces who came in and bombed the old city, forcing out Mosul. But again, by clicking here, we can then jump back in time and actually see what the house was like even before ISIS was there, or in this case, again, we're seeing how it was when it was under occupation of ISIS. We also have done a forensic reconstruction of the house in very high definition 3D, and you can see through here as we go through and just showing a tour. The house has been reconstructed with each room showing the details of this in a very detailed explanation, so people can actually go back and view what the house was like before ISIS had taken control of it, or before it was destroyed by the coalition forces during the time of forcing ISIS out in the mid-2000s. We have a large screen here which we're also depicting, but you have seen before. This allows multiple viewers who visit our booth to see what was displayed on our interactive screen. And then, as I mentioned earlier, we have the testimonials of the actual prisoners. So everything we've done, we've done meticulous details to verify all the testimonials of our prisoners, the prisoners that were actually held by ISIS. In this case, this gentleman is talking about how he was held and chained to this area in the basement. And again, by talking to multiple other prisoners, we verified his testimony as well. And we have the testimonies in multiple language. In this case, the language is both in French and English, so people can actually see a detail. We actually show where this prisoner was being held too, in the basement. Again, using multiple verifications of multiple prisoners. Another example is another prisoner talking about his time during ISIS, where he was in this here and how they took him throughout the prison. In this case, this prisoner is talking about when the Allied forces came, ISIS abandoned them and ran, and the prisoners were fortunate enough to go up these stairs to the roof, break through steel bars or gate and escape out, and then were freed. And our third testimony here of a prisoner talks about where he was arrested and how he was held in this area, and how he was investigated, and he was also tortured during this time, and talking about what ISIS wanted him to say. And that's again verified by speaking to these other people who all went through this same room, who experienced the same forms of torture from ISIS. In this case, this is just a testimony of this man here.
So this exhibition's three walls, spatial narratives of old Mosul. It aims like to reconstruct the old city of Mosul and to visualize how the city turned into a big prison during ISIS occupation. So we selected the three main buildings that represent the main categories of building in old Mosul. We selected one residential house, one mosque and one church, and we reconstructed the three time zones before, during and after ISIS. So the visitor of this exhibition, they can experience the memories of local community. People are telling their stories, they are sharing their details about their experiences as a prisoners in these buildings. So to start with this exhibition, we wanted first to let visitors know about the long history of Old Mosul. So we started by designing the history of Old Mosul timeline. So the timeline, it captured the long history and the details of Old Mosul, its architecture, its people and icons. So the aim of the timeline is not only to focus on how the architecture of Old Mosul developed or how the built environment was constructed, but also to highlight the main communities, the Mosulawis, people that link to that history and that they shape the image of Old Mosul that we know it today. This is why in the timeline you can hear some of the old and traditional Mosulawi music for famous musicians such as Mullah Uthman, Ziryabs and other. And also you can see most of the important paintings for sculptures and painters who was known and still known in the city of Old Mosul. So you can see, for example, here like photos for Jawad Salim and so on. In addition, like to the history of Old Mosul, we have added and explained and how ISIS impacted the reconstruction and the image of Mosul. In the last section of the timeline, you can see and interact different events and that accompanied with ISIS presence in Old Mosul. So this is the main or the first part in the exhibition. Then you can move like to three main sections for the buildings and end up with the immersive area, which we'll explain later. So I will take you for the first part. Let us talk about the Maidan house and also talk about the techniques and the reconstruction for this house. So the virtual tour for the Maidan, actually like this is started by cleaning up the sites, and Al Maidan is one of the main residential houses in Al Maidan neighborhood in Al Mosul, and it was resident by a Christian, one of the Christian family. So we have cleaned up the site and made sure that it's safe to be documented. Then we made like the 360 photography, and also we had some interviews with people who were imprisoned in this building previously. So the documentation and the testimonies of witnesses, we used it to reconstruct and to imagine how this house used to be during ISIS. So we built up the tour in 3 time zones. The one using the architecture analysis and historical studies to imagine how the site looked like before ISIS destruction. How is the beautiful Mosulawi architecture reflected in this example of houses in the city. The second one is like how the same house used it during ISIS occupation, and here we use like some kind of animations and recreation of the crime scenes using the details from the witnesses, the documentation and the photography of the site, and also the work of our investigators and researchers. So this is give a more comprehensive example for this layer during ISIS, and the last one, which is the building right now, how it look like now, if it's like still destructed or rehabilitated again, or like if it's restored or reconstructed. As you can see in this section, like you can see like the some examples of the testimonies or some examples of the people who witnesses in this building, and also you can interact with the building using interactive screen to walk through, to navigate like the different layering in the building during 2014, which is like during ISIS, or the building as it looks now. You can use like the floor plan, or you can walk through the building as it is. In the last part here, you can see a reconstruction for each room, each detail in the building, the floors, the furniture, the color of the walls. Everything was studied, documented, and reconstructed to be in this final results. So Al Maidan is one example for this building, and also we have the Syriac church, and we have a Nouri mosque.
So the interesting thing about this, what we do, is that we're reconstructing crime scenes. So here you can see this is the building as it was filmed in 2020 when our team went and filmed it. But if you press on the 2014 button, you see a reconstruction of a crime scene. You see what it was like when ISIS was occupying the building. And this is not just imagination, this is all based on fact, carefully gathered fact. It's based on investigative journalism. And how did we do that? We did it first by looking at the forensic evidence that was left in the buildings. For example, in some places ISIS had put hooks on the walls and installations for to hang people on, torture tools. Names were scratched on the walls. We could tell that this was a cell which had held people if their names were scratched on the walls. Beyond that, we also interviewed as many people as we could. So we interviewed witnesses, ex-prisoners, people who were held in these buildings, in these prisons by ISIS. And we asked them precisely what had happened in which place. They stood in the buildings where they were held and they said, this is where I sat, this is where I was interrogated, this is where I was tortured. And then we cross-referenced the witnesses to check that all of their information matched up. And based on all of that, we've made these reconstructions. And these are legal documents. This is evidence which has already been used in court, and I hope in the future will be used in court a lot more. So that's what's really important about what we've done here. So the difficult thing to express when you've got an exhibition that focuses on the years of ISIS, we're focusing there on what everybody today in today's world knows about Mosul and Iraq and Syria. They associate it with war and terrorism and violence and destruction. But what we wanted to explain with this timeline is that the history of Mosul is enormous, it's vast. So if you look at it, you can see that it starts thousands of years ago and it expands all the way over here. And then we have screens. So we want to give a sense of the size of the history and the huge cultural achievements of Mosul throughout the millennia. And then on these three screens you can zoom in and see events that happened during the ISIS occupation of the city. And the idea there is to show that this was a miserable short period in this enormous stretch of time.